So before, when we left off, we were able to create a signature string by adding some materials to our crafting bench and then clicking the create button. And this signature string will also be used to check if we can craft an item with that signature. And to check if we can craft an item with the signature, we'll have to make an if statement. And we need to check up on if the signature we just created exists inside crafting items. So inside our crafting items function here, underneath our for each loop, we can make a new if statement. Because up here we are creating the signature, or checking if the signature exists, or we are actually checking, translating the signature into a string, so to say. So down here we can say if crafting items that contains key output. So if our crafting items contains the key we just created out there from our our crafting bench, well, then we can move on and we can start adding that item to our inventory. And of course it's output here. There we go. Okay, so if we are inside this if statement, well, then we are sure that the signature we just made exists in the crafting items dictionary. So we're going to make a game object, temporary object, and we're going to instantiate our inventory manager dot instance dot item object. And when we've done that, we need to add a item script component to it, and this is exactly the same way, the same thing as we're doing when we pick up an item. Now we simply just take it from the crafting bench instead. So the reason that we're doing these things by adding these things is because our slots, when we need to add an item to the slots in the inventory, well, then we need to have an item script. So we need to say temp object dot add component item script, and then we need to say item script crafted item equals temporary object dot get component item script, just as we do when we add a normal item. And then we're going to say item temporary item. So now we have a reference to the item script here, and now we have the item we need to create, and the temporary item should be equal to crafting items try get value output out temporary item. So here we are trying to get the value to make sure that the value actually exists in the dictionary, so we don't get an exception. And we are when we find that item, this item here, out here inside the crafting items dictionary, then we set it out and return it to the temp item. So this item here is going to be equal to the item we just crafted. So if we manage to craft the item, then we're going to say if temporary item isn't null. If we manage to craft something, then we're going to say crafted item dot item equals temporary item. So then we're going to take the new item we just created by instantiating an object up here, and we're going to add the temporary item to that item so we have reference to it. So let's take that one step at a time, because we need to come back here and change some things, but I want to do it step by step so it's easier for you guys to see what's happening. So when we have done that, we can say player.instance.inventory.add item crafted item. Okay. So let's save this and jump back into Unity and test if this works. Actually, one more thing, create blueprints is never called, and we need to call create blueprints. And we can call that from the inventory manager's start function. So basically we need to make a singleton, as we've done so many times before for this one. So you can make a private static crafting bench and call it instance, and then you can either right click, click refactor, encapsulate field, or you can write this this code by yourself, this down here if you don't have Visual Studio. Then delete the set, and then we need to make a if statement, if instance is null. Then we're going to say instance equals find object of type crafting bench. There we go. And then we're going to return the instance. And this is singleton pattern. I think I have explained it a couple of times throughout this tutorial, so I'm not going to go into details with it. So then we need to go to our inventory manager somewhere. There's item manager, there it is. And down here in the start function of our inventory manager, we will need to say workbench, or what is it called, the crafting bench dot instance give me a sec, maybe I wrote something wrong. Crafting bench public static, of course. So remember to make this one static, public static crafting bench, as well as this one up here needs to be static. Inventory manager crafting bench dot instance dot create blueprints. There we go. So now we are sure that we created all our blueprints. So now we can jump out in Unity, give it a try here. Let's try to pick something up. There we go. Let's try it with some iron there, some iron here, and some wood here. And let's click on the craft button. And we didn't get the item. So let's see why we didn't get the item. So let's jump back into the code and check what could be wrong. If we look at the crafting blueprints here, I actually made a mistake, I think. Crafting item empty, iron empty, 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 and so on. So look here. I'm looking for the awesome sword under something called equipment. But the sword should be under something called weapons here. So that's one mistake at least. The strong helmet here, it's written strong helmet with large capital letters. Let's see if it's correct actually. If we go to our resources and open this one up, and we find helmet. And as you can see, strong helmet is written with like capital S and non-capital H. So if we change this to capital H, then we should also be able to find that. And that's why it's so important that you write everything correct and you look at the right places. So my fault was that I looked in the totally wrong places for my items, and that's why it didn't add it to my inventory. Crafting bench, here we go. So now we are looking for our awesome sword inside our weapons, and we are looking for the strong helmet in the correct place also. Strong helmet with capital H. So let's save and let's try one more time. See what happens here. Pick something up, and we are going to have iron here and some iron here and a piece of wood here. And let's click the craft button, and boom, we got our sword in our inventory now. So we managed to fix the little error here, and now we can create our sword. But as you can see right now, our materials are still out here. So basically I think we can click again to add another sword, and click one more time, so we can have infinite swords now in our game, because these materials here are never destroyed. So let's make sure that these are destroyed as well. So let's jump into our craft item function and go down here. And down here in our craft item function, we need to add an if statement. So basically, player inventory.add item returns true or false, which means it returns a boolean. If there was room in our inventory for our sword, well, then it's going to return true, but if there isn't room, it's going to return false. So basically, if you have a full inventory, this is going to prevent you from using your materials for crafting an item that isn't room for in your inventory. So we can if statement and put this one inside the if statement without the semicolon. So player instance inventory add item, because as you can see here, go to definition, it returns a bool according to if it was possible for us to place something or not. So because we can do that, then we can say, well, for each game object slot in all slots. So when we press the create button and it was possible for us to create something, well, then we need to remove an item from each slot inside the crafting bench. So slot.get component slot.remove item. So now we're removing the top item from each slot in the workbench in here. So when we have filled up this workbench with items and we click the craft button, it's going to remove one item from each slot here, so that we basically use the materials. Let's try to save and run the game again. See if we can make infinite swords still. So we need some iron and some iron here and some wood down here. And let's click craft. Boom. Then we have an exception. So operation is not valid due to the current state of the object. So let's see. And this is here where I'm trying to pop my item, remove item here. So basically we need to prevent this because some of the slots in our crafting bench is empty and we're trying to remove an item from it. And when we try to do that, then we'll get an exception because it's empty and it's not possible to remove an item. So we need to make an if statement in here that fixes that issue. So basically we need to make an if statement here inside remove item, inside the slot function, or not the slot function, the slot class. Make an if statement that says if is empty. If it isn't empty, well, then we're simply gonna do all this. And then out here we are going to say return null, because it wasn't possible to return anything because we didn't remove anything from here, just return null. And we also need to clear the slot if it's empty after, because let's say we have one item on the slot. Well, when one item has been removed, well, then this line of code makes sure to reduce the amount. So if we have 5 items on the slot and we remove one, then it's going to be written 4 on the slot. But if we get all the way down to 0, well, then we need to remove the icon to an empty slot. So if that is true, if is empty in here, if it's empty after we have popped it here, well, then we're going to say clear slot, just like that. So when we try to remove an item, we check, well, does an item exist there? If no item exists there, then we're going to return null because we didn't manage to remove anything from the slot. If it wasn't empty, then we're going to remove the first item. We're going to update the number that is written on the item. If the slot is empty, then we're going to clear it totally to show an empty slot, and then we're going to return the item we just removed. Okay, so where were we at? Let's save this and try one more time here. Let's try to clear this. Pick up some items. Let's try with 1 there, and then we're going to put 4 here and 5 here. So when I click craft, we should remove the top, remove 1 here, and remove the 5th one here. Let's see. As you can see, now we created a sword, and we only have 3 iron left here and 4 wood here. And if I click craft again, then we can't craft more items. But there is one more thing we need to take into account. As you can see over here in our hierarchy, we have an empty object, item object clone here, which is the sword, and we need to remove that from our game. So to make sure that we don't get lots of empty objects in our hierarchy here, let's see if we did like this, for example, and added another iron and click craft, well, then you'll see that we would have 2 item objects here, and we're not interested in that. So jump back into your script and go to your crafting bench. And in here we basically just need to add 1 line of code on the if statement called destroy temp object, just like this. And if you save this, then you shouldn't have any problems with those extra objects. Let's give it a try. If we open up the inventory and pick up, and we can try to create the helmet instead now. It's like this, and this is the signature of the helmet. Put it up like this. Okay, and if we click craft, then we got the helmet, so it works. And in our hierarchy here, we don't have any extra objects anymore. One more thing you might have noticed is if you take something and add it over here, and you try to click on it to move it around, you can't do that with the first mouse button. And we will fix that, don't worry. So we will have a look at that later, how to fix it. But for now, just leave it as this, because we are going to create the preview window, preview slot now, and later we are going to fix so we can move everything around. So when we're done, everything should be working as it did before we started adding the crafting system. So I'm going to end this video here, and in the next video we will have a look at how we can create the preview window so that we can see what we are crafting before we actually push the craft button and use our materials.